everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Welcome. Let's start out with any announcements. And an important announcement is that Professor Merritt is back there with some eclipse glasses. So please get some of those. A reminder that next Monday, the eclipse is happening, and we will not have Ocean Studies seminar because it would be happening, the eclipse would be happening during the seminar time. So, but just please pay attention to communication from your seminar professor about that. Okay, so today we're really lucky to have Carissa Maurin from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. She is the Aquaculture Program Manager at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, or GMRI, and is working to support the sustainable growth of the aquaculture sector. Before working at GMRI, Carissa worked at a shellfish hatchery and farm on Long Island, New York, and then got her MS in marine ecology at the University of New England. Currently, she works collaboratively with industry leaders, farmers, researchers, and the business community, and other nonprofits to identify and pursue opportunities that will secure its healthy future. Her focus is helping the industry meet rising workforce demands and providing the kinds of business planning and training resources that will lead to long-term profitability, such as the implementation of the Maine Aquaculturist website and the Aquaculture Apprenticeship Program. So thanks for joining us, Carissa. Take it away.
All right. You guys hear me okay? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. I'm Carissa, and I'm going to be talking to you today a little bit about how I got here, and hopefully you guys can learn a little bit of something about aquaculture along the way. So I grew up on Long Island, New York. So this is down in, let's see if this works. There we go. Woohoo. All right. So this is Long Island. I grew up in Nassau County on the South Shore, kind of one town away from Queens. So the water was very much a part of my daily life. I was always going to the beach. I was always going to the bay with my grandma as a kid, and we would clean up all the trash over there. And so it was definitely a big part of my life. My mother couldn't swim, so she was afraid of boats, so I never went on boats, which has since changed very dramatically. But yeah, so this is where I'm from, and so water's been a little bit about my life, and obviously I've been in Maine for 8 years, and I still say water, and it's not going away anytime soon. So I knew I wanted to do something with marine environment, and so I wound up going to Monmouth University for my undergraduate degree. So there I studied marine and environmental biology as well as molecular cell physiology and did a minor in chemistry. I was a bit of an overachiever. And I really loved the program, but one of the best things that was a part of that program was that I actually got to do kind of a study abroad program where we went down to Eleuthera, which Eleuthera is an island in the Bahamas. It's a very tiny island, so you have to fly into Nassau and then take a very, very tiny little plane, an island hop over to Eleuthera. That plane ride was probably one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I'd never been on a plane that tiny in my life. And it was absolutely amazing once you got there. So we stayed at the island school, and it was completely sustainable. So it had a windmill for power, it had solar panels for power. They grew all their own food, so they had chickens and pigs and goats and ducks. They grew their own plants as well. And this was the first place that I was actually introduced to aquaculture and aquaponics. So they farmed cobia, which is a type of fish. So they had a net pen offshore where they would actually had all this cobia fish that they would farm and then harvest and sell to help sustain the school. And they also had aquaponics, so they would grow lettuce and things like that. So that was the first time I ever had even heard of this type of how to grow fish and how to grow plants for food and to sustain yourself. So that was kind of where my introduction came from for that. So after I left Monmouth University, which was in Jersey, I went back to Long Island. Wasn't really sure what I was going to do. Kind of had my degree, but didn't really have a clear trajectory path of what I wanted to do because so many different things interest me. And I don't know if this happens to a lot of you, but I was really interested in marine mammals. I was really interested in ecology. I was really interested in genetics. There was so many different things about the marine environment that I couldn't really pinpoint what I wanted to do my master's on. And I was very aware that when you do your master's, it's a very specialized skill that you're going to be studying for at least 2 years. And so I wanted to make sure that it was something I was passionate about. And I hadn't really figured out what that passion was. So I moved back home, and I wound up working in retail because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I wound up working at Victoria's Secret and Sears. So it's totally okay for you to take a total divergent path and take a break for a little bit to try to figure out what you're passionate about and make sure that you're on the right path for your future. So eventually, I got a newspaper that was from Montauk. So Montauk is this tip of the island all the way over here. And they were looking for a shellfish hatchery technician. So the town of East Hampton, which is right over here, they actually had a town-run aquaculture hatchery. So they grew hard clams, or quahogs, bay scallops, and oysters. And what they did was they actually grew them up to about a year or two and then used them to reseed town waters. And they did this specifically so the baymen would have something to harvest. They were basically a restoration project that was helping to help keep the baymen on the water and having a living. If anyone has heard about bay scallops in Long Island, they always have trouble. In the last couple years, it's really been bad. They've had massive die-offs. They've been infested with the parasite. And the warming waters is not helping that either. So this is really kind of a last-ditch effort to try to keep these baymen on the water and harvesting product. So I moved out there, and I started work at the shellfish hatchery. So this was my crew. This is my boss, Barley. That's me, and Kate, and Pete, and Shelby. And this was the first time that I actually was really happy in a couple years, I have to say. I was outside. I was working with my hands, I was on the water. Even a rainy day to me was a great day. And that was something that I realized I really had a passion for. On top of that, I really enjoyed growing product. It was really rewarding to see these little tiny babies that we were spawning and having them grow up to be little juveniles that are gonna reseed the waters. And knowing that I kind of did that. It was very made me feel good about what I was doing. I was doing something sustainable and restorative with my job and with my life. And that's something that was always important to me. And part of what I've always learned is that I never wanted to do science just to do science. I wanted to do science for a purpose. And so this really made me feel like I was doing some really great stuff. So I'll show you a little bit about what we did. So we would collect broodstock. So broodstock is basically just adult of that species. So it can be adult oysters, adult hard clams, or adult bay scallops. And we would set them up in these spawning tanks here. And so you can see we have some input of water here. We have them all nicely spread out. And most of the time we would spawn them all together. If you're really specific about genetics, like places like Mook Sea Farm, they'll spawn them in separate containers because they want to make sure they know which egg they're mixing with which sperm. For us, it was more of a restorative process. We weren't selling them for a product, so we didn't really care too much about the genetics as long as they were healthy. And so we would spawn them out, and then once all of that was in the water, we'd collect the water and we would move them into these conicals. So these are really big basins. They would filled with water, and there's a little tap at the bottom, and that's where the oxygen would come in. So we'd bubble oxygen up through the bottom. We would then collect them and sieve them in these really, really tiny mesh sieves in order to separate them by size. And so we would do that for about 2 weeks until they were ready to settle. So larvae, when oysters spawn, they have, they're swimming. The larvae are swimming. And then once they get to a certain point, they develop a foot, and then they settle down to the bottom. And that's when they start producing that hard shell. And so we wanted to make sure that they had adequate food, so we would feed them. We had microalgae growing that we would grow and feed them. And then once they would settle, we'd move them into settling tanks. So these are our settling tanks. So you can see there's kind of like big basins. We had them stacked on top of each other, kind of like bunk beds. These are tubes that had air bubbles, air stones at the bottom that would bubble the air up and in. So this is what we call an upweller. So the water would well up and in and then come down at the bottom. This is a sieve material, and we would put culch at the bottom of it. So culch is basically just ground up shells of oysters. Oysters really like to settle on oyster shell, and so we wanted to make sure they had the best optimal settling opportunities. And so these tubes here were where the food would come in. So we'd again feed them microalgae. As they grow, you feed them different strains of microalgae. When they're small, there are smaller size microalgae that you feed them, and as they get bigger, there's different strains and different shapes that are better. Typically, you want to feed them multiple types of strains at the same time because just like people, they like variety in their diet. So these were our upwellers. And then as they grew, we moved them out into the nursery. So this is on a harbor, so you can see we had direct input of the bay water. These were the tanks that we kept them in. And we had the very same similar situation set up for growing in the upwellers, except for these were downwellers. So this is a change of flow. So we'd put these filters on these pipes right here, and the water would actually come in and up and out. So instead of it, like last time we had that funnel going down into it, here the water is actually being drawn in from the bottom, and it'll go up through there and out. And that's how we kept them in these large conical tubes over here. So different types of styles, but yeah, so if you ever get into aquaculture and shellfish hatcheries, those are the two main types you'll see. There's some different setups, but mostly you start off with upwellers and then you go to downwellers. And you go to downwellers because you want them to settle on the bottom, so that's why you do that. And then the final stage is grow out. So once you get them past a certain size, you're going to want them to go out into the field. And so these are oyster grows or oyster cages. They have 2 black floats, and then they can hold up to 6 bags on the bottom of them. Some of them have 4, but most of them have 6. So basically, once they get big enough, you can put them in these. Some people like to use floating bags instead of the cages because it's less heavy and doesn't require as much equipment. It's a little bit cheaper too. So that's another grow out method. So when we did this, we moved from Montauk to Napeague, which is over here. So this is Napeague Harbor. So we grew them out over here, and then they took a very long boat ride, and we brought them over to the harbor, and we grew them out here. So while we were doing that, I loved that job, and I was there for about 2 years. And like I said, I got dirty, I got cut, I got bruised, and I loved every single minute of it. Until one summer, we started to have an issue with our oysters. Our oysters, unfortunately, got what's called juvenile oyster disease, or JOD. And so basically, this is a disease that can affect them. It's a bacteria that affects them, and it affects the way they're grown. So basically, instead of getting a nice, deep cup like this, they'll have a really shallow cup. And so you can see these don't really have a full mantle either. So the mantle doesn't extend all the way to the edge of the shell. So it affects the health of it, affects the look of it, affects, you wouldn't want to eat these. Not that they would get you sick, they just probably wouldn't taste that great. And because it was a town-run hatchery that was basically funded off philanthropy, we didn't have the money to buy the equipment to test the water, to test the DO, to test the salinity levels, to monitor the way that I was really hoping to monitor to figure out what was causing this. I strongly believe that there used to be a cut in the inlet that used to be there, and then a storm came and filled it in. So I think the water wasn't circulating properly, which was allowing things to grow in there that hadn't before. Do I have any proof that that actually happened? No, because we couldn't afford the equipment. And so that's when I realized that I still had this kind of thirst for knowledge and wanted to understand the environment around me. And I loved growing these organisms, and I loved taking care of them, but I wanted to know more of why this was happening and how can I help. And so that led me to leave my job, as happy as I was. And I had been going to a bunch of conferences and about aquaculture, and everyone said Maine is the place to be for aquaculture. And so I was like, all right, I have to go to Maine. There are 2 options, University of New England and UMaine. Being a Long Island, New York girl and having most of my family still down there, UMaine seemed pretty far away, so I wasn't ready to make that leap yet. So I went to University of New England, and I started my master's program on marine ecology. What I did is I focused on mussel aquaculture, which is something that I had no experience in, so this was another great learning opportunity for me. And I looked at the fouling communities that grew on the floating rafts that were a part of those. So fouling communities basically is any type of marine organism that you don't want to be there. That can be an algae, that can be an epiphyte, that can be a polychaete worm, it could be an anemone, it could be any of those things. They can also be barnacles and other mussels and other types of shellfish as well. So this is a mussel raft. So if you've never seen one of these before, these are basically big black plastic floats that keep these rafts afloat. They have these wooden boards that go across, and on each of these wooden boards there are these dropper lines. And each of these dropper lines has a ton of mussels on them. And so they grow in these long patterns, and they have equipment that actually picks them up and brings them onto the ship to then be processed. So here we go. So this is kind of what it looks like underwater. So you'd have an anchor. This is just like one of those wooden bars going across. And so these are the mussels hanging down here. So this is what we call dropper lines. In places like New Zealand, they use this continual socking method. So they have really long lines that go back and forth. And the reason that they do this and we don't do this is because we use the raft culture, because the eider ducks love to eat mussels. So all of those rafts have these things called predator nets that are surrounding all of the mussels. And so we can't do this nice long line approach like they do in New Zealand, because the eider ducks would come and take most of your farm. I think they can eat their weight in mussels every day. So it's pretty significant. So we're kind of limited by our lovely eider ducks, and that's why. But it was really interesting. And what I found, I wound up comparing the fouling communities from the farm on docks that were nearby. So basically, looking at a place that had a monoculture of mussels and comparing it to the same exact type of materials, but not on a mussel farm, so a dock. So the same black plastic floats, same wood, and seeing what those communities differed in diversity and also in food web analysis. And basically what I found is that the farms had a much higher diversity level than, say, your regular dock that was only a mile away from it. So having this monoculture of mussels actually was promoting higher diversity in these small microorganisms that were growing on the farm. So when you have very high diversity in the lower trophic food level organisms, that means that your food web is pretty healthy, because you need those in order to sustain larger organisms. So I really enjoyed that. And then I was offered a job at University of New England. So I wound up becoming an adjunct professor and laboratory coordinator there. So I taught intro to marine and also maintained all the other labs. So I was doing things like taking students out on boats, teaching them about how to use different equipment like CTEs and things like that. We also did surveys, so understanding how seawalls can affect the level of sand. So basically, like a natural dune versus a seawall, how does the slope of sand affect that? Basically, seawalls, there is no slope. It basically destroys the topography. That's like and a whole nother ball game, which I really enjoyed. And I really love working with the students, but I was missing that aquaculture. I was missing working outside. I was missing the field that had really sparked my interest and had made me go back to school for. So I was kind of keeping my eyes and ears open, as much as I had a great time at University of New England. But there was a job opening at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. And so I applied. It was for an aquaculture program manager, or for project manager, excuse me. And it was to work on a website. And I was like, okay, not really the ideal job that I was thinking it was going to be. I really wanted to be out on a boat on the water doing research, but it gets me back in working with the industry in some way, shape, or form. And so the first project that I wound up working on was the Maine Aquaculturist. So this website, you can go to themaineaquaculturist.org, and it provides a whole bunch of resources for people that want to start a farm, or people who are curious about it, or people who want training. There's different sections of it. So we have the Essential Start Guide. So this maps out how to start your own farm, step by step. So we have these kind of like chapters. So one is do your research, one is select your site, one's get funding, one's running your farm, one's running your business, and one's selling your product. And so we have each of these chapters have different sections, and when you click on them, it'll expand to a page that's kind of got FAQs, and so it'll give you information on how to, seek out training. What are some types of training programs that you should look into? Beginning your business plan, what are some steps for business plans? On top of that, they also provide resources. So it links you to our resource database. Oh, no, that's not, okay, there it is. It links you to our resource database, And so the resource database is a filterable database. So we have filters up here. You can also type in. You can filter it by species, and then also the different chapters of the Essential Start Guide. And there's over 260 resources in there that are curated specifically for aquaculture. So if you're trying to figure out how do I start a business plan, it'll give you the Small Business Administration website that has a map of how to do that. If you're looking for how do I start a business plan, it'll give you a link to Maine Aquaculture Association and Christian Braden, how he sets up his business plan. If you're looking for seaweed, it can give you a link to the National Seaweed Hub. If you're looking for nurseries, it has a list of all of the nurseries where you can buy seed if you're trying to start your farm. So this is like a really great resource, and what was really interesting was that with this, when you compile a bunch of resources together, you kind of figure out where the gaps are. And so we were able to create these anecdotal studies. So these are case studies, and these are written by people who are in the industry for where there's no resources available. So we were able to figure out that there was a gap in understanding moorings. People didn't know how to set up a mooring system, especially if they've never done it before for aquaculture. So we reached out to Eric, who does it for a living, and we said, how do you do this? Can you explain this? And he wrote a case study, and now it's up on there with diagrams and everything, with specs on what size anchors you should be using and so on and so forth, different types of anchors for different substrates. And that was a resource that wasn't available before. So for me, even though I wasn't out in the field working, I got to talk to a lot of people, and I got to talk to a lot of farmers in Maine. And it was a really great way for me to immerse myself in the aquaculture industry here. So I met some really great people, and it was definitely the highlight, was working on these case studies. On top of it, I'm going to go back. We created an aquaculture job board. This is the only aquaculture job board that I know of on the East Coast. This is specific to Maine. I've had requests from other states to be added to this, but I can't, that's a lot of work to monitor all of the other states as well. But it's been really successful. Over the last year, I think we hosted 162 jobs on there. Farms have been really receptive to this. They say they've been getting better candidates, more quality candidates than compared to like a job board like Indeed. Like when you go search aquaculture jobs on Indeed, what are you going to find? Not too much, right? I had that issue. And so this has been a really great resource, not just for the farms, but for people, possibly like you guys who are interested in getting into the industry and are trying to find a way in. If you just monitor this job board, like I said, there's always jobs that are posted on here in different types of ways. I also do NGOs. So if like Maine has a position available, I'll post that. Darling Marine Center has a position open, I'll post that. So it's not just specifically like a deckhand or a farm manager that will be on here. It's anything that's kind of aquaculture based or aquaculture centric. So that's also been really rewarding to see come to fruition. On top of that, we got a grant from the National Science Foundation, and we're working with underserved youth in regionally relevant aquaculture careers, or regionally relevant STEM careers, and we're arguing that aquaculture is a STEM career because you do need to know science, you do need to know the environment around you. And we're specifically targeting 3rd and 4th graders. So in Maine, most people like working on the water. We have a really strong heritage with fishing, and there are some people that feel that aquaculture doesn't belong there. And so we're trying to educate people who are very much against it is kind of like bashing your head into a wall. They have their mind made up, and that's fine, and that's okay. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the way that they're thinking. I personally feel that aquaculture is the way of the future, that it's a sustainable source way of getting protein. But in order to increase the social license, what's the one way to target that is to target the youth, is to have the children understand what aquaculture is and not be scared of it and not think it as some foreign thing that only they do in Norway, that we're doing this here, that we have people that work on the water, that feed their families and are doing aquaculture, and that this is a relevant career for you, and to make that known to them. So we do farm tours. So we partnered with Lewiston, 4th grade, and Ellsworth. And Lewiston went down to Mere Point Oysters in Brunswick, and Ellsworth went down to Bar Harbor Oysters on MDI. And they actually got tours, they understood, they got shown the gear, the equipment, they got to taste oysters, and it was really great. On top of that, we're creating a online game, kind of like Farmville. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Farmville. I might be dating myself in that one. But It's basically Farmville, but for oysters. So basically, you start an oyster farm, you grow it, you have to flip your cages, you have to clean them, you have to sort them, and make daily operational decisions. So it kind of makes you realize from an ecological standpoint that there's things happening in the water, but it's also the point of the game is to make money. And so it's also teaching students economics and running a business and understanding, yeah, you can buy that fancy sorter, but it's going to cost you a lot of money every month. And you have a lease, and you have to pay for that lease every month. You know, with aquaculture, you're leasing a part of the land. So there's like, you pay rent on that, basically. You're paying rent on that piece of water. So these are some of the students that we worked with. So this is Kelly from Muir Point. These are some of the Lewiston students who went down there. So these are a bunch of fourth graders. Some of them were very excited to try the oysters. Some of them not so much. And it was really exciting, though, that they did try it. So we had some really great opportunity. I'll show you the game really quickly. Oops, there we go. All right. So we get a game going, get started. So this kind of explains that there's different sites that you can pick from. Not every site is the same. Some of them have warmer water. Some of them foul faster. Some of them are more protected. There's storms that affect your farm. So this is kind of showing you that there's different types of variables that you need to look at. So we have different sizes, different amount of cages, different existing stock, storm risk. And so that's like Spruce River is like the most protected and small one. Then we have, this one's like 1.2 acres. There's a storm risk is medium. Then we have like Oyster Bay. And then Gull Island. Gull Island's got a high storm risk, but it's the biggest with the most cages. So you have to weigh your options on what do you think is worth the risk. And this is our lovely seagull Frankie who helps us out. So I'll just take Lighthouses Cove for now. I'll show you. All right, and then this is Marty. He's our lovely little seal. He helps us out. So we go to a clothing store, and you actually get to pick your avatar. So we have multiple skin tones, multiple eye, nose shapes, mouth shapes, hair. It could be anything. So we really wanted to make sure it was inclusive, especially with Lewiston schools. We have a lot of Muslim students there, so we want to make sure we included a hijab in that. You can pick your clothes, your shoes, your boots, all the things. Get a nice hat on. So this is your avatar that you can create. The kids have a lot of fun with this. I do too. Then you go buy your equipment. And we have different oyster cages, and you can see that they have stars where there's fouling resistance and damage resistance. So fouling, you have to clean your cages. You have to flip them in order to clean them. And then damage is from the storms. And then we have a sorter that helps sort your oysters. And then you can also hire employees as well to help. So there's different things. Again, more economic decisions that you're going to have to make for running a business. And then we go into our hatchery, and you buy your seed. And so you can pick small or large seed. So again, if you buy all small seed, it's going to be about $400. If you buy all large seed, it's going to be about $700. But the large seed is more resistant to storms and to die-offs. So again, you have to make that economic decision on what you want to do. All right, and then we have a market. Sorry, almost done. And so there's different orders that you'll come into, and there'll eventually be a list of a couple different ones, and you can buy, there'll be like wholesalers that want to buy 300 oysters but at a really low price. And then there'll be someone coming in who has a wedding, so they only need 100 oysters, but they're going to pay, $3 an oyster. And so you have to weigh which orders you would like to take and which orders you'd like to turn down, and if you have that stock. So it's really funny. A lot of the students, they actually would not take anything less than $1 for their oysters. They would just turn them away. They'd be like, I don't care how many they want, I'm turning them away. So it was really, really fun to watch them and how their minds work. And so basically to flip the cages, you want to click them and they'll flip. And then if you don't flip them back, so these check marks show that they're flipped. And then if you wait too long, it'll say that it's too dry. So basically your oyster's out of the water for too long and you need to flip them back over. And then there's a sorting game that they play as well to sort the oysters. So basically you go in and it helps sort the oysters. Let's see, time-wise, I might not be able to get to that. But yeah, so basically this is it. You get to run your own farm. You get to look at your market. You get to sell your oysters. Oop, no, that's not the one I wanted to click on. Zoom game. And then at the end of it, they get to see these really cool metrics of how profit loss over time. So it has a financial summary, your input, output, your growth. So it tracks your growth over time to see how fast things are growing. And then it tracks all your transactions. So we actually showed this to a bunch of farmers, and they were like, can you create this for us, for our farms? And we're actually in the process of trying to get a grant to do that now. So it was pretty cool to have this be so accurate, I guess, in a way, or so useful that the farms themselves were like, hey, how do we get this for our farm? Because this is information for us that's going to help us be successful. So that was a lot of fun. So I've learned over time that working with children and working with the industry kind of goes hand in hand, and that the industry really likes to work with them. So that's been a lot of fun. So again, I've kind of stepped away from doing like real research, but in my eyes, I feel like this is like leading the industry towards a more sustainable future and growth, because we're going to need workforce, we're going to need kids, we're going to need education, and that's really helping. One of the research projects I am involved in, which is really cool, is about mussel bed mapping. So our mussels have been declining steadily over the last 60 years. We're not really sure why. We think it has something to do with temperature, that they're moving subtidally. It could also be due to stressors like green crabs and other predators that are in the area. And the Department of Marine Resources has a historical mussel bed map, and it was taken from, I think, over 10 or 20 years ago. And so like a place like Mackworth Island, which is in Casco Bay, the mussel bed is on that map is located on the east side of the island. It's not there anymore. It's on the west side of the island. So those mussels have now moved 180 degrees across that island, around the island. And we're finding more and more that this is happening. And so our question is, are the mussels actually disappearing, or are they just moving to places where they were before that you're not looking for them? They've always been in this spot for 20 years. My grandfather harvested them right here for 20 years. They're not here anymore. So they must be gone. Are they, or are they not? So we're using community science. So basically we have low tides that happen, and we're encouraging people to go out and take pictures of any mussel beds that you can find. If you go to GMRI's website and you go to the mussel mapping, you can actually go down there and fill out a survey and take pictures and send them in and submit them for us. And what we're going to do with that is that we actually have a boat that has an acoustic device on it that can be used to identify mussel beds. So they were able to accurately identify the reverse sound waves that are coming back, and they can tell you what's shell hash, what's sand, what's mud, what's clay, and what's mussel beds. And so we can drive around an island and actually map out in a grid-like status where these mussel beds actually are. And so we're hoping to do that to be able to understand what's going on in the ecosystem, especially with mussels, and what's happening, because wild mussels are basically the only reason that we have aquaculture mussels. So aquaculture mussels rely on wild spat. So they collect wild spat that's in the ocean. And so that has become really unreliant. And so if we don't have mussel spat, then we don't have mussel aquaculture. And so we're trying to figure out what's going on with the mussel beds to try to help understand and help keep that moving forward. So if we know where the mussel beds are, then maybe we can put equipment in the water to identify when they are spawning, using eDNA to detect mussel larvae and figure out when they're actually there, so we can try to understand what's happening in the physiology and the histology of these mussels that are happening in our oceans. On top of that, I would love to see mussels in hatcheries. So New Zealand, who has that really great green mussel industry, they have hatchery that's half privately funded and half governmental funded, and it is working. And I think that's what we need, honestly, in order for this just to keep going, is that we need government investment in it. Whether or not that will happen in the next 5 years, I don't know, but I would love to see that. All right, moving on to my kind of last project that I've been working on the most. So in 2020, we did a workforce development study, and we hired a team from Scotland to come over here and check out our industry. We did that because they're more advanced in aquaculture and they have more training programs than we do. We had them do surveys, and they surveyed the industry to understand the current and projected workforce needs in Maine, as well as to catalog the existing training and education courses that were here at the time. And so that all can be found in our workforce development strategy online at GMRI's site for free. And so what we found is that the industry really values life skills, problem solving, trade skills, so electrical, plumbing, mechanical, construction, basic husbandry knowledge, so how to basically maintain and keep a shellfish alive, work ethic in work and for retention, so showing up on time, being ready to work, as well as maritime skills, so understanding how to behave on a vessel, how to tie basic knots, how to, if you know how to do any type of motor maintenance, that would be a huge benefit. So those are the things that they're really looking for when they're hiring someone. Things such as marine biology, HACCP, food processing, HR management, and R&D, these are kind of at the top of the pyramid, and if you don't have those, it's not stopping them from hiring you at all. A lot of companies can't even afford an R&D person on their farm right now. We have a lot of really small companies. As much as they would love to eventually be at the point where they can hire an R&D person, they're not there yet. And what we found was that there were some major training gaps in these key skills that the farms were looking for. There was a lot of programs that were focusing on these skills, so we have our 2-year, 4-year PhD, MS programs. And students were coming out of those without, at the time, so again, this was in 2020, students were coming out of those without actually really understanding what it took to be in the industry. I had a farm tell me that they hired someone who had a 4-year degree in biology, and they quit after 2 weeks because they didn't sign up for this. They didn't sign up to do this, but they majored in marine biology and wanted to work on aquaculture farms. But when they finally got the opportunity, they didn't realize what they were getting into. And that's a very common occurrence. And so it actually was turning the farms off from hiring anybody who had a degree at all. And I spoke to a lot of farms that they go, as soon as we see a degree, we toss that resume right out the window. And I was like, that's a problem. That's not good. Because I was one of those people who had a 4-year degree and then started working as a farmhand, and I really got the most out of it. And so we can't just write off an entire group of people because of some bad experiences. So I worked with the Maine Aquaculture Association, and we created the occupational standards. So these are a clear and comprehensive list of specific training and skills and knowledge that are needed for working in the industry. This was created to standardize workforce training. This was an industry-led process. So we met with 32 companies up and down the coast of Maine and different species and different sizes. We made sure we met with big companies as well as small companies. And we were able to map out the key skills, knowledge, and duties that they're looking for a farmhand, for a crew chief, and then for a manager. And those are all listed out. And the reason that these were all created was for educational institutions to now take this and say, this is what the industry is looking for when they're hiring. Put this into your programming. Put this into your curriculum. This is the stuff that's important. And we published these in 2021, and a lot of schools have been using them, which is really great. So I know University of Maine has been introducing this into their curriculum. They have partial badging programs and training programs. And so it's been really great to see these kind of being upticked into the universities. I don't know too much about your curriculum, but I'm hoping that maybe some of this has made it in some way, shape, or form. But if it hasn't, these are all online for free. So they're on the Maine Aquaculture Association's website. If you go to their page, it says for educators. It'll have all of these listed for you to download for free. We're actually in the process of updating these since it has been a couple years since we did them. We want to make sure that these are staying as up to date as the industry. Aquaculture is a very innovative industry, and it's changing all the time and adapting all the time. And we want to make sure that these change and adapt with the industry. So we've just started doing more interviews this year, going back to people and understanding what has changed and what's different. For me personally, I've seen the biggest difference in the kelp industry. It's a lot more advanced than it was a couple years ago. They have a lot more food safety regulations that they've been following, which was really cool to learn about. So we're going to probably be breaking out kelp a little bit more in the next iteration that we do, which is going to be really exciting. And then we got a grant from USDA NIFA. And so this was to address that gap in training programs that we were seeing for those key skills. And so we created the first officially registered apprenticeship for aquaculture. It's for shellfish and for seaweed. We got funding through NIFA for farms to host apprentices. They got a stipend of $5,000, and the apprentices got a stipend of $3,000. So we have funding for this for 2 years. We're finishing up our first year, and we're starting the second year in April, which is going to be really exciting. We also purchased boots, bibs, foul weather jacket, and life jacket because we wanted this program to be equitable. We wanted to make sure that being able to purchase the gear to do your job properly wasn't a barrier to entry, because as you may know, boots can be $150, bibs can be close to $200, so they're expensive equipment. So like I said, as shellfish and seaweed aquaculture technician, Maine Aquaculture Association is the sponsor. It's 144 hours of related technical instruction or classroom time. That's being hosted by Southern Maine Community College, and then 2,000 hours of on-the-job training. So basically working at a farm for 2,000 hours, which equals to about a year if it's full-time work. We have this industry steering committee, and all the schedule work is based on those occupational standards. So again, we're all tying everything all in together. So we worked very closely with these farms. The first year, we had 28 applicants. We had 10 that had a degree in some type of related field. We had 9 that had maritime or commercial fishing experience. We had 7 that had previous aquaculture experience, 5 who had terrestrial farming experience. We had some others like data analysis, communications, and then we had some general laborers, so people that just did construction or gardening or landscaping. And then culinary. So it was really interesting to see these kind of buckets pop out for people who are interested in aquaculture. So we only had 6 positions available, and here are the 6 that made the cut. So this is Gabe. Gabe works at Muscongas Bay Aquaculture. He is 22 years old. He does not have a degree. He is from rural Pennsylvania. He has a background in construction and landscaping, and he had never been on a boat before, and he absolutely loves his job. He excels at everything he does on the water. He calls it river therapy. He is the happiest he could be. He loves working outside and working with his hands. He is one of the fastest learners that I've ever met, and he is just literally a poster child for the apprenticeship program. So basically, this program is trying to open this up to people who wouldn't think that they'd be able to do this job, but we know that they can because they have that key skill and that key passion. So his supervisors cannot praise him enough. They think he is absolutely amazing. And it's just like, look at that picture. Doesn't he look like he's supposed to be on the water? He's like, like a pirate over here or something. So Gabe has really been an absolutely amazing addition to the aquaculture family that he wouldn't have been in there before. Then we have Kat. So Kat is from Ohio. She's at Muir Point Oyster. She was originally in Alaska. She was working for Salmon Sisters in Alaska, so that's a commercial harvesting kind of brokerage place. And she wanted to move back to the East Coast and was looking to have a job in something more sustainable. And so she wound up joining us and joining Muir Point and wanting to gain skills that she knew would help her benefit herself, her career, and get her a job in aquaculture. She wants to become a farm manager. Like, that's what she wants to do. She's really been excelling at it. And one of the things she learned is that she says that she didn't know she was as strong as she was. She says this job tested her physically, and she was surprised when she stood up to the challenge every single time. And I will vouch for that because I've seen her lift cages, and she can do it. And so if she can do it, if I can do it, I used to do it, you can do it. Then we have Colin. Colin does not have a degree as well. He actually had gotten into the food and beverage, so I believe he was working at a brewery for a while. And he liked it, but he just kind of wanted something that was more outside and more working with your hands. And so then he came over to Muir Point Oyster. So he's been working alongside Kat. And again, he's been really enjoying it and really love working with his hands. He's been taking off, and he says that he's probably going to stay on with the farm as well. Then we have Matt. He's at Ferta Farms. He had some aquaculture experience. So he had worked on a scallop aquaculture farm previous to this. And he really wanted a job that would gain him some more knowledge on the classroom side of it. So like I said, we do those 144 hours of RTI, so basically they get really in-depth with shellfish biology, with seaweed biology. You get field trips. We go to Down East Institute. We go to Atlantic Sea Farms for processing, see their processing facility. And we have a speaker series that has videos that talk about things that you wouldn't typically learn while working on a farm. So we have one that's from Ocean Rainforest that's doing a bull kelp farm in offshore waters off of Santa Barbara, California, that's being used for fuel production. So that's something that a typical farm in Maine wouldn't be exposed to, but we're exposing them to that. So that's why he joined this program. And he actually is being promoted to farm manager at the end of his stint with us. And then we have Mike Pauly. He had some aquaculture experience as well, and he just really wanted to learn more about the regulations, about the leasing process. And now he's actually helping his farm to write a whole new lease application to add hard clams to his farm. And he said the only reason that he feels confident that he can do that is because of the training that he received in the apprenticeship program. So yeah, these people are absolutely amazing. They make me happy every day when I come to work that I get to talk to them. Then there's Alex. Alex is actually a commercial fisherman from California. So I didn't know, my naivety, he was a lobsterman in California. Did you guys know there was lobstermen in California? Yeah, I did not. Yeah, they have no claws. Yeah, so he wanted to do something that was more sustainable as well. He felt that the commercial fishing industry wasn't where the future was, and so now he's in Islesboro, Maine, working on a mussel and kelp farm with Shay and Josh Conover, and absolutely loving life and enjoying it there. And he says he's probably going to stay on the island, so we gained another island folk. So yeah, so these are the awesome people I work with. This year, we wound up having 12 farms sign up for 6 positions, and we had 62 applications for the apprenticeship program for 6 positions. So this program is growing immensely, which is really exciting, but also really terrifying. But it's super rewarding because we're creating this really awesome workforce for the industry, and that the industry wants this to happen. They're looking how to fund this for the future and providing these key skills that you can learn and show up and say, I know how to do X, Y, and Z, even if it's not, a background in biology. If you can say I can tie knots, I can work hard, I can show up on time. That's huge. And they'll be willing to accept you into it. So yeah, thank you.
All right, we have time for a couple questions. Anyone have a question?
So why would there be negative sentiment towards aquaculture?
That's a great question. Thank you. So the negative sentiment towards aquaculture is from individuals that feel that aquaculture is taking away space from commercial fishing. They feel that the ocean is free and public for everyone to use, and that when you do aquaculture, you have a limited purpose or even a lease. And like I said, you're renting that space, so it's closed off from everyone else to use. And so they feel that it's, you're taking a public piece of water and turning it into a private location that's only used for one entity. That's kind of where it started from. And unfortunately, some people are very rooted in that, and they feel that that's not an appropriate use of our public waterways. Yeah.
Hello. So my grandfather is actually a bayman himself, and I've spent a lot of time with him out on Gardiner's Bay.
Nice.
And what I was curious about is, what is the status of the Montauk Shellfish Project? And does the town of East Hampton provide any kind of incentives for people who run aquaculture projects?
That's a great question. So the hatchery is still up and running. I believe there's a new manager there, but Barley, my boss, he's still there. He's still working it. So they're still doing hard clams, bay scallops, as well as oysters. They are still working to reseed waters. They have actually started a oyster gardening project with some of the locals. So that spot that I showed you where we had the nursery, there's actually now some aquaculture leases that are over there that's with East Hampton locals for them to get interested in aquaculture and help them to grow their own oysters. And so they will get a percentage of the oysters, and then a percentage of the oysters go to the restoration project. And so that's, again, trying to educate the public on what's happening and try to make sure that it's not just their efforts, that they're combining their efforts with the locals as well. There are a lot of people that don't want to look at aquaculture. That's another reason why people are against aquaculture, is the not in my backyard NIMBYism. And so, especially in East Hampton, there's a lot of rich people that have houses on the water that don't want to look at aquaculture gear. So there's been a lot of pushback, and so this is their way of trying to work with the ones that are supportive of it to try to gain support to kind of quiet the ones. There's always a few loud ones, and so if you can get a bunch more to support it. But it's been a fight, and I know actually one of my old colleagues, he started his own oyster farm out there, and he actually quit because the riparian landowners just kept pushing him and pushing him and pushing him, and lawsuit and regulations and everything, and he put his hands up and he said, I'm done, and it was really a shame. And so the hatchery really tries to make sure that they can educate everyone. They do tours of the hatchery. They take regular phone calls. They bring students in. So they do that and try to educate as many people as possible. But yeah, so they do have the clam gardens, which are the oyster gardens, which are taking off pretty well with some of the locals. So yeah.
Carissa, thanks so much for sharing your work with us. Let's give Carissa another round of applause. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.